Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hello again, my friends, and welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show. We are now like 14, 15 months into it. We've been doing a show a week for quite a while, and this show was designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show with Craig Brown, who is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Although today, it's just me hosting, no Craig for all of you today, because today we're doing one of those episodes where we sort of talk about career skills. And so I'm really excited because every week we try to bring really interesting interviews and topics that are going to help our listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today is one of those days. Today, we have a guest who is an expert in sort of growing your career. How do you, center in and go from where you are to that next level of leadership? Sara Canaday, she helps educate and connect and inspire leaders for both their current and their future roles. So Sara is a speaker, an author. She also is really prevalent on the LinkedIn learning platform, and she has a whole bunch of courses, and I want to talk to her a little bit today about her newest course also. So Sara Canaday, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Glad to have you. So you have kind of an interesting career. You started off working for big companies before you became a consultant and a trainer. You spent some time with USAA. You worked for Dell Computer. Tell us a little bit about your career journey.
Yeah. So I spent about 13, 14 years in what I say is a very, very sexy industry of insurance. And no offense to anybody, but wasn't the most exciting and cutting edge industry, but boy, did I learn a lot. Most of that time was in operations, sales, and of course, customer service.
So, and then a few years ago, you went out on your own. You wrote a book, you started speaking at conferences, and you do a lot of executive coaching and training for different types of organizations. What made you make that pivot? Well,
actually, it was a somewhat personal and pivotal time in my life. I had reached, a nice level. I was a VP of account services. Something that I had aspired to, felt like I was doing all the right things, getting certifications, amassing my experience, my knowledge, working overtime. But I got to a point where I sort of looked around and I said, is this what I want? Is this it? If I have to write another report that looks the same and sounds the same, and I have to go before an executive committee to download the same metrics with this month's numbers, it just wasn't doing it for me. And so I began to reflect, and I even worked with a career coach who helped me explore other options and other ideas of how to use my skills in a way that was, brought back meaning to my role. And with that exploration and those discussions, I ended up moving on and starting my own, boutique career and leadership development firm, something I never thought I would do.
So let's talk. You've written 2 books. Let's talk about your first book, because I love the concept of that, especially for a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast, because the book was called, if I've got it right, You According to Them. And it was all about how you build your career by paying attention and remembering what other people think and how they view you. It matters. So let's talk about that first book and the message that you had with that.
Certainly. And I think I wrote it because I looked back at my career and, I had the proverbial, rear view mirror held up to me several times by people. And though it was hard to hear, I grew tremendously from that honest and candid feedback. And then I began to coach others while I was at corporate who really were seeking me out because they knew I would be candid, but in a compassionate way, and that I would tell them the truth, something that I think other leaders and other colleagues avoided. But I wanted what was best for their career. And sometimes, it's about blind spots. There are things that we do, they can be very subtle, but we don't know it. And they could absolutely keep us from reaching the next level. So that book, the subtitle is Understanding the Blind Spots That Impact Your Reputation and Your Career. Mm-hmm. So that, it was a combination of my own learning and helping others. That's what drove me to write that book.
Well, I know firsthand, we all have a lot of blind spots that hold us back in our lives and our careers. And so for people who are listening to this show, who maybe they have to make a pivot, there's a lot of things going on in the world, obviously, with COVID and with teams becoming work from home and distributed teams. For a lot of reasons, people have to make changes, either inside their company, or maybe they have to make a change to find a new employer, a new path. What advice do you have for people about sort of knowing themselves as sort of a first start on that journey?
Yeah, I think what I have found, especially lately, is it's about your mindset around the idea of change or pivot or transitioning. Do you digest that as something being done to you, or do you look at it as an opportunity for you to reimagine, to reinvent, and to rebrand, right? It's almost, I find there's almost two schools of camp here and the way people are looking at pivoting. Now, don't get me wrong. I love routine. I'm very methodical. I do things in advance. I'm a planner. So I don't necessarily like the constant need to pivot and change, but I have learned to accept it and try to look at it as, okay, this sounds really crass, but I've got to eat my own dog food. I tell people and leaders that they've got to be willing to try on new things, to dip their toe in the water, to experiment. My gosh, your audience knows this more than anything. They do Agile, Scrum. They're iterating constantly. And so it's kind of taking that same model and applying it to our careers.
So you touched on the word mindset, and I love the whole concept of it. I've read the book Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck, and I refer that really to everybody who I talk to, because I think it is such an eye-opener to the fact that we have that closed mindset. We're not going to be able to advance and move through. And in today's world, though, it's sort of become sort of a little bit of a buzzword. And I think a lot of people hear the term that, well, it's all in your mindset. They don't even know what they don't know. So how do you even discover where you stand with mindset?
Well, a lot of times I'll challenge people to think about what is it that they want, not only for their career and themselves, but how do they want others to respond to them? And let's face it, I'm not talking all altruistic here. When I say respond to them, I mean, do you want to be on the don't lose list at work? Do you want people to select you to run the program or project or represent you at the next virtual conference? So you really need to think about, what is it you want people to say about you? What is it like to work with you? How do you handle stress and uncertainty? Can you manage your emotions well? Are you somebody who puts others at ease despite what their level of knowledge is, or their confidence level, or where they are on the org chart? Those are the kinds of things that people pay attention to. And so for you to get in tune with your mindset, you need to think about those things instead of simply thinking about what credentials can I add and tick off on my list. What can I say? What projects have I launched? What budget have I managed? Yes, those are important. But at the end of the day, people look at the first set of factors over and above anything else.
Well, and you just said something that may or may not have crossed a lot of people's mind. And that is, I wrote it down. Do you want to be on the do not lose at work? In other words, do you want to be on that list when layoffs come that it's like, we can't lose Becky. Whatever we do, we're keeping Becky. I think a lot of people have never thought about it, that these lists exist. Now, they probably exist informally. Companies probably don't have a list of, like, these people go last. However, you hit on that point that managers know who they want to keep. Managers know who's expendable. So if you focus on that, what are some tips to make sure that you're aware as the worker that you're getting yourself on that list?
Yeah, I call it the don't lose list.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And I think the first one, you know all too well because you talk about this, but I think people wait too long to build their network and build relationships. Suddenly people are reaching out to me and to you that maybe we haven't heard from before or haven't heard from in a while. And that doesn't cut it. You've got to start building your network internally and externally now. Or if you have done a good job of doing that, you need to start tapping into it, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Because I'll tell you, in pivoting, you got to be willing to be uncomfortable. So it's interesting though, because you talk about people who reach out. A lot of people get confused when you say, building your network. And you're right. I've built my career teaching people this, that it's not about having a LinkedIn connection. A like, a link, a share, and a follow is not a network. And reaching out to somebody saying, hey, will you connect to me on LinkedIn, really kind of means nothing. And reaching out to strangers saying, hey, will you review me on LinkedIn? I mean, who cares? And it's not about getting them to do it for you. It's what are you doing for the other people, right? That's right. Yeah, that's what the connections are about. Because let's face it, we're human. It's instinctual. We are either filling people's bank account or we're taking away. And people have memories. And, it may sound crass. Don't get me wrong. I like to help people, but I will remember if somebody paid it forward for me, I will bend over backwards to help them.
Yep. Well,
make an introduction. Yeah.
I had a situation where somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, and I know them, and they said, would you write me a recommendation? Well, they're good at what they do, and I've seen them perform work. And so I said, of course I will. Will you do the same for me? And then I wrote them back and said, great, your recommendation is written. I would appreciate one too. And they just ignored me. And it's like, people have really long memories when you make a relationship one-sided, don't they?
That's right. That's absolutely right. So, building your network is huge. I think the other thing, Thom, that I'm finding is that a lot of people, it used to be that you would follow the career mapping of your company or industry, right? There was sort of this career ladder that your company unfolded for you or that your industry standards sort of self-select, right? And we would follow that. We would build our skill set around that. We would think about the next level in the career map. Nowadays, I tell people, yes, look at the career map, but look outside of it. Instead, look at what are the industries that are flourishing under these conditions and will continue to flourish. And how can your skill set map to those industries or to those roles, right? So no longer confining ourselves to a set map for our role or for our industry or for our company, I think is the other really good solution here.
So your first book helped people look at how they were viewed. Your second book is called Leadership Unchained. And the subtitle of that is Defy Conventional Wisdom for Breakthrough Performance. So a lot of people listening to the show, that they want to break through. They want to get to that next level. They want to become that leadership role. So once they get there, now what? How do you unchain leadership once you're in that role of leading the team?
Well, and let me just say that much of the content in the book is really applicable to anyone, project managers, program managers, entrepreneurs. And the intent of that book was kind of to bridge the first book, which is paying attention to the experience you give others, to now pay attention to the experience you create for yourself as a current or emerging leader. And what I mean by that is I was speaking to leaders every day who told me they felt like either nothing but walking to-do lists or firefighters. And
I think a lot of people who listen to this can relate to those two feelings.
Absolutely. And that the meaning of their role was beginning to be diluted, right? And it's an always on, do more, and now very uncertain world. And we were trying to use the same strategies we've always known to be success strategies. We were working longer hours, staying more tethered to our devices, accepting more meetings, trying to consume more data, and we still weren't keeping up. So something has to give, and we have to sort of consider throwing out some conventional success strategies and trying new ones. And that is the premise of this book. And so there are about 7 strategies that some may call counterintuitive because they run counter to what we knew to be successful. But absolutely things that I think are going to keep us from feeling like we are just walking to-do lists.
Sure. I love that. I love that you either feel like a firefighter or a walking to-do list. And as I said, I think people listening to this can relate to that. I know that in my own career, sometimes I feel like I'm that walking to-do list, and there's no end in sight because the next day you wake up and you've repopulated the to-do list. So give us maybe 1 or 2 of the tips in the book of how people can get past that.
Sure. Well, one is, of course, I focused my first chapter on something that I need to learn most, right? Biggest work in progress for me. And that is balancing a bias for action with a bias for thought. Because my tendency and my success strategy that I learned, that I was told, that I watched others, is to constantly take action, to be responsive, to be reactive, to move, to be decisive. And while all those things served me well, in some cases, they backfired. And in this particular climate, I think we have to be very conscious that we don't always move, and in fact, that we take strategic pauses. And what I'm talking about here is not a mental timeout. It's not mindfulness or meditation. I'm not against any of those things, but I'm talking about what I call a mental time in, where you literally think about everything you've seen, read, and heard that week so that they can marinate and so that you can begin to separate the signal from the noise, so that you can make connections that you couldn't begin to make when you were moving quickly from one meeting to the other. And so that ideas that you thought of during meetings and when you were reading something could actually see the light of day, and that you could prioritize. So critical right now. It again sounds counterintuitive because we're so busy, we need to keep moving. But I implore people to take strategic pauses.
I love the comment of the take the time in, and for like on a Wednesday or a Friday, just take the time to say, what have I seen all week, what's going on, and what matters, and just sort of have that combination of mindfulness and attention to what is on your plate. I think that's a really, really smart tactic.
Yes. And of course, so my second one, I always bring up these 2 together because I know that people are thinking, okay, that sounds great, Sara. You have no idea what it's like at my company. Yeah, right. As it is, I'm working after hours. But so what I say to them, that if you need to make space for those strategic pauses, then you need to think about the next strategy, which is to make everything earn its rightful place on your to-do list or your calendar, right? Be a relentless protector of what gets your time and attention. And I go as far as to tell people who are in my workshops to start a stop doing list, literally. We talk about where they want to go in their career or as a leader. And one of my first questions is, great, what are you going to give up? Or what do you need to give up in order to get more of what you want?
And we had a great episode a couple months back with Eliz Green, and she talked about stress and uncertainty as sort of that focus of that episode. And she said the same thing. She talks about, how she in her own life had just had too many things on her calendar. And when she took some things out that didn't belong there, that weren't giving her joy or making her money, and she just removed them, it not only made her more productive at work, but it made her family life better. Sort of had this positive loop of saying no to the things that really didn't need to be on that list. So that's great too. So Sara, you also are a trainer for LinkedIn Learning, which I think used to be called lynda.com. It's a place that people can go to get specific sort of nugget-sized learning rather than having to go, enroll in college. They can actually pick up specific skills. You've done a bunch of classes on that platform. How many courses do you have on LinkedIn Learning now?
So right now, I believe I have a total of 15 courses on LinkedIn Learning.
Yeah. So you are really focused on doing some of these sort of little nugget learning courses, and your newest one is, well, why don't you tell us the title of it?
Sure. The newest one is really based on my latest book. And it's just a way to deliver that information in a slightly different way with some case studies and some examples, just so that it's layered and it brings the concepts to life. And that is counterintuitive leadership strategies for a VUCA world.
Now VUCA is a military term, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. So do you think
that's right?
So do you think right now we live in a world that is those four things?
And some. Yes, I do.
Because I definitely think, we can just sort of go through them. I think if we all look at our careers, no matter what we do for a living, volatile has certainly been the word for 2020, right?
It has. It has.
And that would couple with the uncertainty that comes along from the volatile. Do you think that businesses are seeing chaos, or do you think that maybe that might not be what we're going through right now?
Oh, I think especially right after the pandemic, I can tell you, absolutely, we were in chaos, regardless of your industry, I think. Even if you were growing as a result, right? Even if your services were now in more need than ever before.
You had a different type of chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. You were trying to keep up. But if, unfortunately, you were in an industry like retail or restaurant, you were just trying to pivot to preserve any semblance of what you were offering your customers and do it in a safe environment in a way that would allow you to keep your doors open. And people were trying all kinds of things. And I got to tell you, it was pretty impressive to see how quickly the chaos began to subside after trying and pivoting and listening and seeing what worked and what didn't. But to this day, I think some are still in chaos and some have settled into a new normal.
So then the last part of that VUCA is ambiguous. And I think that that's where we're stuck, because we don't know if this is going to go on for 2 more months or 2 more years. So what advice do you have for people who are staring into this ambiguity and it paralyzes them?
Sure. I think it's the same thing that I suggest to leaders. And that is to try to put structure around the unknown. And so I think we're going to see a shift from strategic planning to scenario planning. So even if it's your career you're talking about, what you want to do is do best case scenario, worst case scenario, and somewhere in between. And you want to have a plan for all 3 of those and contingencies for all 3 of those. And I know that sounds like a tall order, but I gotta tell you, it will help you feel a sense of control around the unknown.
So Sara, as we sort of wrap this up, a lot of people who listen to this, they're trying to grow their careers. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show, is you are so good at helping people with that. What sort of last pieces of advice would you give to people who look out past this ambiguity, who have sort of that long-term vision of the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What advice would you give them if they really want to excel in that career, whatever level that might be?
So I tell people to look at this as an opportunity to really think about what you want on the other side of this. And this is a lot of things this year. It used to be just the pandemic. Now it's social injustice. It's the elections. It's fires in California. It's flooding in Louisiana. But I think more and more people are taking stock, right? Instead of saying, what's happening to me? Oh my gosh, what I'm going to need to do. Some are actually using this as an opportunity to reinvent, as I said early on, and to reimagine what their work life can be moving forward. So that would be probably the most important thing I would say.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons that the Digital Enterprise Society exists, is we're here to help people to be able to look at all those options and bring them ideas, thoughts, and education around it. So, Sara Canaday, if somebody was listening to this and they want to know more about you, how do they find you?
Check out my website, and it's Sara, no H, and Canaday is just like Canada with a Y at the end. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook. And send me an email if you have a question, or reach out if you have a thought. I'm always open to people's perspectives. So yeah, I'd love to hear from your listeners.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And everybody who listened, I want you to join us every single week, because every week, Craig and I bring you more thoughts, ideas, and information around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.